So today we wanted to use this time to understand the process and explain the process that we've been engaged in over the last, I don't know, I think it's, 6 months total to update the 4 or 5 essentials, and understand basically present to you the changes in the field that have influenced the revisions and why the new ones look different, in some cases quite different from the previous version. And then actually dig into each essential and hear the reasons behind the specific changes that we've made. So we don't have very much time, so we're going to go fast. But the overview, the big picture is that it's been a long road, and we'll try to highlight the major signposts and exits and things. But we're really excited to be sharing this and unpacking this for you today. As you know, we've been updating all of the essentials over the past few years. Pre-K, K3, and 612 were all updated just a few years ago, but 4-5 was not. So this effort is part of a larger understanding among MASA and the coaching network and everything else that research evolves, and so should we, which is Nell Duke's quote, not mine. So we're trying to continue to keep these updated so that they are useful to you and useful to classroom teachers. In particular, this is really a fortuitous time to undertake this review. The previous version of the 4 or 5 essentials, which Dr. Fitzgerald worked on, originally were published in 2016, and a lot of things have changed. In particular, a lot of research and attention has been devoted to this age group since COVID. As you know, if you saw me present at the February quarterly meeting last year, COVID and concerns about kids who missed foundational skills instruction and their reading trajectories changed my research trajectory. This is when I got involved in doing research and became switched from an early elementary to a later elementary researcher and beyond. I'm doing middle school research now. But also there's been this focus on the science of reading, which I know you've all heard about, and those two things together really spurred a lot of meta-analyses, systematic reviews, practice guides, a lot of really great thinkers to take a step back and say, well, what do we know in the field about these things? And so I've just put two in the slides here. One is the IES practice guide that Sharon Vaughn put out a few years ago. You've seen me talk about that before. And then also this Kittle, Amendum, and Booty Science of Reading for K5 multilingual learners. It's a systematic review of systematic reviews. So, I mean, that's the type of thing that we were able to get in the last few years and incorporate into. And so all of that rich research has been incorporated into these updates. Um, see. So we know that this is a really important age that we wanted to focus on and give due attention to because we see in that NAEP data that there is a critical need for better instruction post those K through 3 years. We've had a lot of focus on K3, but we know that kids are not comprehending and reading at the level that we want, whether we're concerned with whether they're, at the proficient level or the basic level. We don't have enough kids at either level. And we know that this is a critical age and stage. This goes back all the way to Jean Shaw's writing about the 4th grade slump when kids are trying to transition from that earlier K3 stage into the higher level reading comprehension skills that they need. There's often a little bit of a slump there for them. And we know that this is because kids are now needing to integrate the skills that they've already learned and continue to build on them. And they also need quite a bit of content knowledge at this stage to comprehend the things that the grade level texts that they're meeting in schools. So this process of updating these 4 or 5 essentials, I actually wasn't involved until the end of this slide. So if I missed something, please let me know, Heather. But basically, there was a big Hanover research began the literature review and had participated in the K3 essentials as well. And then reviewed and provided feedback to the 4-5 work group, and there were clarifications and adjustments needed. And then all the way at the end of this slide, it came to the research team. So there were a number of iterations I wasn't part of, but then at that point, what Hanover had done was turned over to us. This is the team. It's me and Dr. Fitzgerald and also Dr. John Strong at the University at Buffalo. He's a collaborator of mine who also does research in 4-5. And so we were very lucky to have all three of us because this was quite a big job. I don't think we would be here today if we didn't have such a strong team and so many people involved. So he wasn't able to join us today, but we'll be presenting and sharing out his work. We were all involved in all of the final decisions. We also had a lot of additional support from Dr. Emily Kaler, Lisa Cortez Hendricks, Mary Petio Dunn, and Lindy Johnson, and everybody at MASA, including Annie Sphere, and Heather was amazing all the way through this process, as well as the Hanover research work. So this involved a lot of people doing a lot of work, because what we ended up doing is over the summer and fall, review the changes Hanover had made, define a process that was similar to the K3 essential updates process, assign a primary and secondary researcher and searcher to every essential. And we traded off on that, determined the search engine's criteria and keywords that were associated with each essential, pulled everything relevant that had been published since 2016, which actually turned out to be quite a bit of things in some cases, color code and rank to decide if things were relevant and met our criteria, and then actually dig in, read the studies that we had determined were relevant, and propose changes that were then reviewed to the language or additions based on those research studies that were then reviewed by the rest of the team. And so everything, even though we worked on different essentials, everything presenting to you today, we all agreed on and signed off on and discussed. Um, Feel free to chime in if missing or forgetting anything. Yeah, and so we had criteria for what we would include. I want to go over those briefly just to understand the kinds of changes you're likely to see. Basically, these have to be research studies. So while there are also wonderful like opinion pieces and thought pieces and practitioner pieces that have come out during this time, those did not meet our criteria and were not included. There had to be a systematic collection and analysis of data to answer a question, or a systematic review of research with an adequate sample size and published 2016 or later. And we needed at least fourth graders or fifth graders to be included in the study. So some of them had much more than that, like K-12, and some of them just had one or the other. But a proportion of the students in the studies had to be in one or both grade levels. And it had to be, we looked for studies with diverse groups of children that tested the impact of specific classroom instructional practices. We also only included research that had a design that allowed for some sort of causal inference. So if we do this, we expect this change to happen for the kids in the classroom. We wanted to really limit it to things that we knew had been research proven in that way. And we included studies conducted outside of the US, but only studies that use English as the language of instruction, because languages differ so much in the challenges they provide to beginning readers. So this is a very broad overview. I was trying to go back through and just see how many review articles we had. It was quite a bit, over 300, I believe, that were initially found, published since 2016. We ended up digging into 90-ish. It was hard to say because of the way that many studies had implications for more than one essential. So some things were doubled, but then also many studies had multiple implications. So studies were appearing in multiple places, but basically over 90 studies were the ones that we ended up digging into deeply and identified 164 implications for the 4-5 essentials. Now, and sometimes this meant we made changes for clarity, adding detail, or reflecting changes in the research. But many of these were just providing additional support for the essentials. We were like, this is additional support for this bullet or whatever. So it's not quite as overwhelming as it might sound. I want to make it clear that if we tried to use economy of language, so we tried not to add things unless it was really clear that a change was needed. And if nothing had come out about a particular bullet, we did not make changes. We didn't remove anything, because the way research works is sometimes things are hot topics and there's lots of research, and sometimes they sort of fade out. But just because there hasn't been new research on something in the last 10 years doesn't mean it's no longer true. So that's a big overview of our process. And then once we made the recommendations, they went to ELTF and GLAN and the 4-5 group and the 6-12 group, and we got feedback and made revisions, especially around clarity and what we thought would be helpful for making sure that these are usable and understandable for teachers. Am I forgetting anything, Heather? Okay, great. So now we are here, and so I'm going to turn things over to Miranda to get us started by looking at the changes to the front matter. Mhm.
Thanks, Laura. Good morning. It's good to see everybody. Like Laura said, I'm going to get us started walking through some of the changes we made to the front matter of the 4 or 5 Essentials document. So here we're going to start with the purpose statement that appears on the front page of the document. And we only made one small change, simply to clarify the focus of this particular Essentials document. Next slide. Click next. Uh-oh. Bear with us for a second. Perfect. So now you can see that the first two sentences here read, the purpose of this document is to increase Michigan's capacity to provide effective and equitable early literacy practices for every child every day. The document identifies research supported instructional practice for grades 4 and 5. Next slide. Also, in the front matter of the 4 or 5 Essentials document, we now have a section focused on core commitments. And this section really outlines some shared values that have undergirded this work that really help us orient readers to the document and encourage a shared purpose with this document. So we changed the wording of this statement only slightly from what appears in the K3 document by removing the word early in early literacy. And what this section does is it really highlights the idea that education builds on every child's interests and individual cultural and linguistic assets. And it also expresses our commitment to working against all forms of bias that cause harm and lead to inequitable education in literacy and across all subject areas and domains. So that's the big idea here. And next slide. Perfect. We also added a section focused on enabling conditions, which is also a section, new section that's included in the K3 Essentials document. Next slide. So this enabling conditions section was designed to respond to calls to include practices or conditions that enable children to thrive in all school subjects and domains that aren't limited to literacy instruction. So these include conditions like having an asset orientation towards children, families, and communities, and providing instruction that's culturally relevant, responsive, and sustaining. And by including these enabling conditions here in this section, in the introduction to the essentials, we left the body of the essentials document for literacy specific practices with an understanding that the conditions in this enabling conditions section undergird all of those practices. And it's important to note that we write that in the enabling conditions that they include, and then we have the bulleted list because this isn't an exhaustive list of enabling conditions. We also made explicit reference to the school-wide and center-wide practices here, which weren't available when the first draft of the 4 or 5 Essentials came out. Now I'm going to turn it over to Laura to talk through a few other sections of the front matter.
Yeah. So one of the things that we also wanted to draw attention to was it was the robust resources section. Several teams in the feedback process in particular asked, this is the section that focuses on making sure that teachers and districts have in classrooms have the resources they need to actually teach. The essentials are not a curriculum, so curricular resources are needed, and those curriculum resources we don't as in general have never like endorsed or recommended specific curricular resources. That's usually the domain of commercial providers. But so one thing that kept coming up in the feedback process was are these questions about educational technology products and AI. And this is one thing that this is a topic of my research, actually, and I am not opposed to using digital text, digital products, and that kind of thing in instruction. I'm also part of a national AI center researching how AI can support early literacy development, as is Dr. John Strong. So we are certainly not like anti-technology in the classroom, but we did not feel that the level of research that exists now enabled us to make specific recommendations about incorporating these types of things into the literacy into literacy instruction. And in particular, the research is changing very quickly, and the research itself is not specific to the types of things that teachers often have in their classrooms. So, while there may be a study that shows that multimedia supports, for example, can support vocabulary learning, there is not a study of the specific, there's very rarely a study of a specific tool that a teacher could go out and get and use in her classroom. And so we just felt that there was not a one-to-one correspondence between what the research shows and what we would want teachers to actually be doing with these types of things in the classroom. And so you'll see some new language around this that basically says that if that these tools can be helpful, but they have to be reviewed just like any other curricular resource to see if they align with the essentials. Some of them will, some of them won't, some of them will be distractions, some will be helpful. There's quite a wide variety of things that teachers have access to, and you should see these as tools to support the content of the essentials or not, rather than some separate thing in its own right. And so we basically say we have a statement here at the bottom that basically says research on educational technology and AI in educational settings is fast movement and moving and to date inconsistent. Some tools absolutely work and some don't. And the evidence does not indicate that we need to do this, that you have to use technology or that, and especially that you need to do it every day. And basically, our understanding of the essentials is these are practices that you want to do every day. So we didn't want to write in that teachers needed to use technology every day. That's not to say it's not good or important that kids learn to use digital technology, but it's not something that has reached the level of the essentials in terms of we need teachers using technology every day. We don't. There are many days when a teacher could provide effective instruction without using any tech, and we wanted to keep that option open, especially for districts that have fewer resources available and can't go out and purchase the newest technology all the time. So that was one issue that came up. This is where you can find the robust resources section. There were a couple of other minor changes. I am actually at a place where I realized I can't see my notes while I'm sharing my screen, so I may be forgetting a few things. But basically, you will see that you can see that there are places where we also really highlighted. That's the robust resources section. When we move on to the introduction to the essentials, we changed language to be a little bit more positive, but really underscore that we do believe that all the essentials are essential. That's why we call them essentials, and they should be incorporated every day, and that we believe that they should be integrated into Tier 1 instruction for all students, and that they should be not approached as adding on, but rather a way means to engage students in content and learning. So one of the things that came up quite a bit in the research is that integrated instruction and multi-component instruction is more effective for students at this age. They don't necessarily need an extra, the essentials are not asking you to add on 10 minutes of vocabulary instruction every day. They're asking you to look for ways to integrate vocabulary instruction into your literacy and your disciplinary and content area learning. And so that's what these additions are striving to address. And I believe that is the introduction to the essentials. I'm going to turn it back over to Heather and trying to figure out how to get my notes on my phone before we continue.
Sure. So we are going to take just a moment of reflection, personal reflection on one or more of the following. What shifts in practice did you hear or see, or possibly changes that excite you, or possibly clarifications that are needed? And you can just do this on a piece of paper if you'd like, open up a Google Doc if you'd like, whatever you like to do to take notes. If you prefer a more scaffolded approach or a document already ready, on the agenda, there is a personal reflection that you can either pull up for the view and make a copy, or there's a forced copy. But we're going to take just 1 minute periodically throughout this time to take a moment to reflect. So I'm going to set that 1 minute timer before we move on. Okay, and with that, we are going to move on. I know that that was quick, but we are going to continue and we'll take a few moments each time to pause periodically throughout this time. Do know that today is just about the changes that occurred, and there will be further learning about the content of each of the essentials and what that looks like in practice over the next year. And with that, we'll move on to Essential 1.
Perfect. I will get us started with Essential One. As you know, Essential One focuses on deliberate, research-informed efforts to foster motivation and engagement. Next slide. The highlighting that you see on the screen shows where we made changes or additions to Essential One. So you can see that many of the elements of the practice remain, but we did make a few modifications to 1.1, 1.5, and 1.6 to provide clarity, to better align to the other essentials documents, and to reflect recent research. So if we look at the specific bullets, we extended 1.1 to provide more information and clarity for teachers about how, you're good on that slide, about how to create opportunities for children to identify as successful readers and writers, for example, by teaching reading strategies, by providing feedback, and providing opportunities for students to see improvement when looking at their own data. For this one, we added 2 post-2016 example studies on this. And these studies identified some specific practices that teachers use to foster competence specifically, which is what you see incorporated there. For 1.2 through 1.4, there weren't any new research studies, confusions, or requests for clarification or elaboration that led us to make changes. So those stay the same as they did in the original document. The next place you see changes is 1.5. Here we revised to provide greater clarity for teachers related to what's involved in setting and achieving goals, which includes things like identifying strengths and needs and monitoring progress. We also wanted to emphasize here and extend the important point that the K-3 essentials make about avoiding incentivizing reading through extrinsic non-related reading rewards. So now you see that reflected in this document as well. Also for this, we added some additional post-2016 studies, and these studies identified motivational practices such as supporting students to identify their strengths and learning needs and monitor their progress toward goals. Finally, for this essential, we made some small revisions to 2.6 in response to a request to more clearly highlight the importance of connecting to students' backgrounds and cultural experiences to cultivate student interest. These revisions provide greater clarity, I think, and also better align with the K-3 and 612 documents' emphases on cultural responsive and sustaining literacy instruction. Next slide. So overall, our changes in Essential One serve to provide greater clarity for implementing the practices based on recent research, to better align with other essentials documents, and to enhance continuity across grade levels. Next slide.
All right. So this Essential 2 focuses on intentional research-informed instruction using increasingly complex texts and tasks to build comprehension, knowledge, and strategic reading knowledge. Dr. John Strong led the updates for this Essential and the next one, Essential 3, but as I mentioned, we all agreed on the final changes, so I'll be summarizing his work here. So the highlighting here shows how we revised the language in this Essential. Based on the latest research, including several meta-analyses, we were able to emphasize higher order discussion, particularly in bullet 2.1, literacy and content integration in bullet 2.2, self-monitoring in 2.3, text structure instruction in 2.4, inference instruction in 2.5, and comprehension strategies in 2.6. Next slide. When you look at the track changes, you can see that there used to be a large introductory paragraph in Essential 2, but we ended up removing that in order to align the structure of this Essential with others, and we ensured that any information in that paragraph had been reflected in the bulleted list instead. We also added the word higher order preceding discussion for alignment with research, and also the K-3 and 612 Essentials. Basically, we want all of those to speak to each other here. And if we keep going, you'll see that the remaining bullet points received significant revisions based on what we found in the research. We added clarity in 2.2 regarding the building of content and vocabulary knowledge in science and social studies. There were several meta-analyses in that area. We also revised bullet 2.3 for clarity based on requests for revision to make sure that it was clear and aligned with research. There were also several meta-analyses that came out on using narrative and informational text structures and on inference instruction since the last version of Essentials. So we actually felt that those merited their own bullets at this point. Text structure, information, instruction, and inference had enough research to be separable bullets. And we also revised the recommendation for teaching comprehension instruction strategies based on new meta-analysis showing that there's an optimal combination of strategies as well as as well as the fact that they are enhanced when they're taught with knowledge building instruction. There used to be sort of this idea that it was one or the other, or that one thing was like better. Both things together is what reflects the research best now.
Mhm.
And so overall, this we now think that Essential 2 is quite comprehensive in nature and reflects a lot of really terrific research that's come out in the past 10 years. We can go on to Essential 3. I know we're moving really fast, but this is, again, as Heather said, just the introduction. Essential 3 focuses on small group instruction using cooperative, collaborative, and flexible grouping structures and instruction targeted to children's literacy needs. So this is the place where we're thinking about where kids' individual needs as well as Tier 1 instruction can be addressed. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that the highlighted show that we added additional information here, given requests for revision in the revision process and alignment with content already in the Coaching Institute and models. We highlighted cooperative and collaborative grouping structures in this main text, attention to both code-based and meaning dimensions of reading and writing in bullet 3.1, higher order discussions in 3.2, collaborative discussions for writing in 3.5, and added bullets 3.6 and 3.7 on aligning whole group and small group instruction, as well as multi-component or small group instruction in alignment with the latest research. So if we go on to the track changes, you'll see the specific changes. Basically, there's a lot of additional clarity, particularly in bullet 3.1 in better defining differentiated instruction. We also added the phrase higher order preceding discussion to align with Essential 2 and, of course, the other essentials. And we added an example of a research-based framework, Quality Talk, because there was some additional research on that. No revisions were made to 3.3 or 3.4. For 3.5, we added collaborative discussions in relation to small group writing instruction. Um, we also added bullet 3.6, which is about making sure that small group and whole group instruction align so that you're not using different materials, different terminology, and different approaches in different parts of the day. And the whole group instruction at this stage is largely focused on vocabulary and reading comprehension in grades 4 or 5. So as information about so the small group instruction provides opportunities to target other things like multisyllabic word recognition, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension with both narrative and informational texts to align and elaborate and meet individual needs. And as I mentioned several times, multi-component instruction becomes really important here as well. And I think, yeah. So basically, overall, we hope Essential 3 provides greater clarity and information to help guide small group instruction for teachers, which I know is an area of challenge for many of them. So I'm going to turn it back over to Heather to do a little reflecting before we move on to Essential 4.
So if we take just a moment, you heard a lot in these last couple slides here around the first 3 essentials. So take a moment to reflect, maybe a shift in practice. You're hoping that this would turn into, or you would see in practice, maybe a change that when you heard that you said, yes, finally, or you were excited, or maybe some clarifications that might be needed. So we'll take just a moment to personally reflect. At the end, you will have a chance to reflect in a group setting around one essential. So this is a time to gather some of your thoughts along the way in preparation for that last group meeting. Okay, hopefully that was a moment for you to jot down a couple of things you want to remember or want to think a little further on from the first three essentials, and we'll move on to essential 4.
Great. So you're going to get tired of hearing from me, but Essential 4 was one that I worked on. So I'm going to keep talking. This one focuses on reading fluency and stamina. This is something that if you know me, you know is very near and dear to my heart. And we generally do not have enough focus, in my opinion, on continuing to build this reading fluency and stamina in fourth and fifth grade. So what you'll see, next slide, from the highlighting is that we mostly elaborated this essential. We didn't. I don't think we changed it in any like essential way, but we really tried to add more detail based on quite a bit of great research that had come out, particularly some large meta-analyses and reviews of fluency practices, but also some really carefully designed studies that allowed us to really look into the mechanisms that seem to be associated with change and improvements in student fluency. So basically, we added a lot more specific detail. And if you go to the next slide, I'll walk through those changes. Specifically in 4.1, we added the word reading practice because we wanted to clarify that what we're finding in these reading fluency studies is that reading aloud to students is, while that can be thought of as modeling fluent reading, isn't what moves the needle. It's when kids have practice with their eyes on the text that they start to reap fluency benefits. So we wanted to rephrase that to make it clear that the reading practice is the active ingredient here. And we also want to describe the continuum of support that shows up in these fluency studies, describing how fluency supports can range from modeling, which would involve, modeling fluent reading to all the way which is a lot of support, all the way down to peer or partner reading, which is less support, with choral or echo reading in between. And there's lots of different ways to use those techniques to support kids in reading. And it's important to think about how the level of support that you're offering to your students matches the challenge of the text. Sometimes we think fluency practice all has to be like independent with an independent level book, but that's not true. These fluency supports have opportunities to provide scaffold in more challenging texts as well. If we keep going down in 4.1, you'll notice we also changed the word familiar to accessible to indicate that these are students that texts that students are reading. They are participating in the reading. They're not, but not necessarily texts that they have read before. We thought familiar imply that they should only do fluency practice with texts that they had read before. We also added specific performance goals, including working towards accuracy, speed, and/or prosody. And then the importance of feedback and coaching from an instructor as part of that repeated reading routine to reflect what the conditions were in the research studies that have shown that repeated reading is such a beneficial practice. If you go down to, let's see here, one, two, sorry, that was 4.2, not 4.1. In 4.3, we added more detail based on details from the research studies reviewed about the types of materials that can be used for fluency practice. We specifically added the caveat that students should read aloud with audiobooks. If they're not looking at the words, it's not really fluency practice. Audiobooks are good for other things, but not for that unless they have a copy of the text that they can read along with. And we also note that a range of genres, topics, and genres and topics are beneficial for fluency practice. I will say the research was actually specific that had come out in the last 10 years was specifically about informational text. So originally we were like, we should definitely incorporate informational text in your fluency practice, but we got feedback that might indicate that we should avoid narrative texts for fluency practice, which is not what the research says. So basically we just wanted to highlight that a range of texts and giving kids opportunities to develop fluency in a range of texts is important. Melanie Kuhn calls that situational fluency, allowing kids to develop their reading fluency skills in more than one kind of text is important. In 4.4, we added detail and language echoing the IES practice guide regarding stretch texts. And this is to clarify that not only do texts get harder over time, but students get practice reading texts that are challenging, and fluency supports can be used to access those stretch texts. We did not make any changes to 4.5. And in 4.6, we broadened the language to reflect the different types of collaborative reading that can be incorporated into fluency practice. There were lots of studies that showed that reading with partners, reading in small groups, reading to each other, that's all very beneficial. And while we didn't specify this, this is something that is particularly beneficial for multilingual learners, any sort of collaborative reading practice. We went back and forth about whether or not to specify things that were particularly supportive for multilingual learners. But my impression is that if something is particularly supportive for that group, it is in here. That's just a little background. So overall, I'm really pleased with how this essential now provides more details from the research for how to implement these evidence-based fluency practices. And we'll move on to Essential 5 with Maria.
Excellent. Essential 5 focuses on facilitating higher order discussions to support students' meaning making with text. Next slide. For Essential 5, we made a number of revisions to each element of this practice, really to provide more clarity and to reflect recent research. Next slide. Here we even have some changes for the stem of the practice. So in the stem of the practice, we added higher order to provide greater clarity and to bring it into alignment with research. We also responded to feedback to bring the language of this 4.5 essential into alignment with the use of higher order discussion in the 6.12 document. We also added a variety of complex to clarify that the types of text students should have opportunities to read and discuss during the school day. So just a couple of small changes in the stem of that practice there. For 5.1, interactive read alouds includes now a number of embedded research supported practices. And so we drew on recent research, especially from Sharon Walpole, John Strong, and colleagues to clarify teacher instructional practices during interactive read alouds with the aim of better supporting classroom implementation, right? So when we say read alouds, what do we mean that teachers are doing? So here we've provided some research-based examples of teacher moves during interactive read alouds, which I think are going to be particularly helpful. For 5.2, we changed the word grist to opportunity and the word rich to higher order. And these changes just really serve to clarify confusion, some confusions that came up in feedback around terminology, and also to align with the revision of the wording in the stem of Essential 5. We also removed some of the examples, as you can see, the strike through there to keep 5.2 from being too wordy or cumbersome for the reader. And we added to the end of it that the teacher also asks big questions to frame discussions, also to better align with recent research. 5.3 is also new and focuses on supporting students to practice ground rules and social norms for discussion. So this was added to align with recent research on facilitating high quality discussions and what that looks like. It also provides clarity related to supporting teachers to plan and implement high quality discussions in 4th and 5th grade classrooms. So really, what are some of the things like this is an example of a practice that a teacher would do even just to get students ready to have a discussion that the research suggests is particularly helpful. Next slide. So 5.4 is also a new addition, and it focuses on engaging students in goal setting for discussions and providing opportunities for students to reflect on their discussion goals after they've concluded a discussion. So this one was added again based on alignment with recent research on high quality discussions and to provide additional clarity for this essential of really unpacking what does it look like for a teacher to support higher order discussions in the classroom. In 5.5, we revised to clarify that using discussion moves is one way for the teacher to scaffold students' participation in discussion. And this language is aligned with recent research, such as Wilkinson et al. From a few years ago, and other pieces as well. Finally, nope, not quite finally. For 5.6, we provided some clarification that the teacher needs to move beyond simply providing discussion routines by providing explicit instruction and opportunities for students to practice and use discussion structures and routines. We also added a third example, and this is consistent with an earlier essential as well, of a discussion routine based on the research on quality talk, which is based on the research that was conducted by Karen Murphy and colleagues. So you'll see this example a couple of times in the essentials now. And finally, for 5.7 here, we added the word discussion just to make it clear that this element was also discussion oriented and just to more clearly align with the rest of the elements in this practice. Next slide. So overall, our changes in Essential 5 really serve to provide greater clarity for implementing the practices, to reflect recent research findings, and to better align with the other Essentials documents so that our language is consistent and we have continuity across grade levels. I am going to keep us going with Essential 6, and this is one of the essentials that Dr. John Strong led, but since he's not with us today, I'm going to share where we landed with revisions on this essential. Essential 6 is our writing-focused essential, or at least our writing foregrounded essential, and focuses on research-informed and standards-aligned writing instruction. Next slide. You can see from the highlighted changes that 6.1 adds some clarity on print and digital writing. 6.2 clarifies text types and genres. 6.3 clarifies content writing. 6.4 adds a focus on integrating writing and reading instruction. 6.5 adds greater clarity and exemplifies explicit writing instruction. 6.6 adds a focus on text structure, and 6.7 adds a focus on morphology and handwriting to transcription instruction as based on students' assessed needs. Next slide. On the track changes slide, you can see from our revisions that we clarified that students should have opportunities to write on paper and digitally in 6.1 based on both feedback and in alignment with research. For 6.2, we provided more clarity on text types and genres, revising opinion to persuasive and argumentation, shifting from the language of the Common Core State Standards to the terms used in research, which really highlights a distinction between persuasive and argumentative writing. In 6.3, we gave some examples from research on content areas in which writing is shown to be effective, such as science, social studies, and math, as well as additional example of content writing genre historical arguments. In 6.4, we added this particular bullet in alignment with recent meta-analyses on integrating writing and reading instruction, such as reading source material to generate content or responding in writing. For the next essential, for the next bullet, 6.5, we updated this in alignment with the latest research on revising writing, so including peer revision and giving and receiving feedback, as well as we also provided an example of explicit writing strategy instruction using the self-regulated strategy development, or SRSD approach, which is one of the most researched methods for teaching writing out there. For 6.6, this is a new addition as well, and we added it to highlight the importance of explicit instruction in text organization or narrative and informational text structures. We also added from the latest research an emphasis on morphology and handwriting, legibility and fluency, not necessarily letter formation here, but this is for 6.7. And this whole piece really focuses on transcription skills for students in grades 4 and 5. Next slide. So overall, for Essential 6, our changes here are really comprehensive and aligned with the latest research on teaching writing. I'm going to turn it back over to Heather for just a few minutes before we move on to Essential 7.
So one thing I want to name is you can see my cursor right here on the screen, and you've seen several points already, and you'll see it again where there's these little arrows that designate what that specific instruction should look like. And in some of the early feedback loops, people said, "Hey, can we combine or can we make these match?" And the researchers looked at what does it say specifically for this type of instruction. And so that's why it's spelled out differently in those different areas under different bullets, is because each type of instruction, the research is demonstrating these specific steps or these specific ways of doing that instruction. So if that's a wondering that you're starting to have already, I just wanted to name that before we go any further. And I'm talking about these ones right here, where it goes a little bit deeper and gives us a little more clarity. And that is one thing that as we looked at the essentials for the 4 or 5 before, a big piece of feedback was we want more clarity. We want more information. And so that was a big focus for this team is to provide a little bit more of that for the field, for you as coaches and for the teachers and administrators that support students. With that, we'll take a pause. So go ahead and look at your essentials for, we're on 6, so 4, 5, and 6. Think about those for a moment and reflect on what shifts in classroom practice might you anticipate. Are there any exciting changes or are there clarifications that might be needed? Remember, this is personally for you, but also there's an opportunity to connect with others at the end. So about a minute and a half. Okay, and with that, we're going to move into our last section of essentials. And just as a reminder, we're just going over the changes right now, and there will be learning coming and some of the conversations and the reflections you're having right now. And at the end will be feed forward into that and for what is covered during that time and what's really meaningful to you. And so as we go through this, we're really highlighting those changes so that we can dig deeper moving forward. And those of you who are around in the network when the K-3 were revised, we also did a similar practice of looking at looking at the changes and how the research was reflected in the updates. We'll start with number 7.
All right, I got to work on number 7. And number 7 focuses on vocabulary and academic language instruction. At least, if you go to the next slide, it did. But as you can see, this was a little bit unusual in that we actually decided to change the language of the top line essential itself, not just the bullets underneath. And we did this a few times, but we were careful about it. We didn't do it willy-nilly. And the reason for this is that there's quite a bit of research that's come out that highlights the specific word reading instructional needs of students in grades 4 and up, and that those are different than the instructional needs in K-3. Some of you have seen me talk about this and the decoding threshold research and the IES practice guide, and what it has to say about this before, but I will not stop talking about it because it's really crucial that word not reading goes somewhere in the essentials. But it really does need to be integrated with vocabulary and academic language instruction at this level. This is not a separable skill that you're practicing, but rather part of that language, that language work. And it really needs to be embedded in the content and comprehension work. So these are not isolated or separable skills. We're not suggesting, that you spend a bunch of time decoding, doing, phonics or decoding work with kids in 4th and 5th grade, but rather look for ways to integrate to this. So it was actually a wonderful opportunity to incorporate that research and build it into the revised Essential 7. Some of the researchers that have influenced this include Jessica Tost and her work, Rolando O'Connor's work on the Eshlov and BEST strategies, Devin Kern's work, and other studies out of Florida Center for Reading Research on multisyllabic decoding. But there's also been quite a bit of innovation in the vocabulary area as well. In particular, there's a terrific meta-analysis by Gina Cervetti at U of M, on which Miranda is a co-author, that really clarified some of the active ingredients in vocabulary instruction. And so the result, we changed the language of the essential and broadened it a bit. We added new bullets, we reordered things, and we added more detail. There's just a lot going on in this one. So I'll try to walk through the changes. I will say, not to pitch my own afternoon session, I'm going to be talking some more about the research behind these essential changes in my afternoon breakout session as well. But basically, something that the very first bullet here, the new 7.1, focuses on explicit instruction of specific words, what we typically think of as vocabulary instruction. And the primary change here is that we added looks to be now to be a separate bullet that says explicit instruction of specific words includes. Actually, we want that to eventually be integrated into one big bullet. But basically, we wanted to actually be clear about what the research says is effective when you're explicitly teaching specific words. So it's going to be, we basically elaborated here. And that includes multiple exposures, target words, student-friendly, clear and concise language, examples and non-examples, and using target words, context, that kind of thing. So basically, those are things that we could pull out of the research that show what makes that sort of word level instruction efficient and effective. What will eventually be 7.2 is a new bullet that we added, which pulls out and emphasizes the connection to visuals, objects, and multimedia support that support the learning of specific words. There was enough research on this to justify its own bullet, and this is another one of those bullets that's especially true for multilingual learners. Thinking about how to connect to visuals, objects, gestures, multimedia support is something we want forefront in teachers' minds. But what will eventually be bullet three has not been changed, but elaborated. Basically, we changed the word. It used to say we were encouraging the use of vocabulary in a variety of contexts, and we switched that to scaffolding because we thought encouraging wasn't specific or clear enough about the role of the teacher. And we want to make sure that we emphasize that we want lots of opportunities for kids to use the new words throughout the week and throughout the day, not just as part of literacy instruction, because that's what really makes those words stick. We also highlighted the group and collaborative discussion of words. Again, that's something that helps process those words and move them into long-term memory and is especially good for multilingual learners. The bullet 7.4 is a new and meaty one, and this is where we get into strategies for decoding and learning the meanings of new words that you encountered in text. At this age, a lot of vocabulary learning is happening through interactions with texts. A lot of their oral vocabularies are fairly well developed, and what we found, and I might be misrepresenting, so please chime in, Miranda, if I'm wrong. But my understanding of Cervetti's meta-analysis was that teaching kids to learn words, strategies for learning new words, is actually as effective or more effective than teaching kids words straight out. But the evidence is just as good, if not better. And also, if you just think about the number of words kids need to learn, they have to be learning how to do that on their own. So this bullet includes explicit strategy instruction in the various strategies that can help kids learn words from text. And this is just going to be critical. So there are two different things, different bullets that include explicit instruction elaborated. One is about how to teach specific words, and one is about how to teach word learning strategies. And that includes decoding strategies and learning meanings and vocabulary strategies. And again, I'm going to provide a little bit more information about those in my session later today. Not trying to plug it, but just in case you're wanting more detail. Um, if we continue going, next slide here, you can see that 7.5 is mostly the same, but we added across the content areas to emphasize that this happens throughout the day and to better align with the 612 essentials. 7.6 is the same, but we moved it down. It used to be higher up. We moved it down because we wanted because we wanted to kind of pair the morphological bullets at the end here. But it's really important that morphological knowledge is critical for kids to use word learning strategies, both decoding and vocabulary learning strategies. So this is not moved down because it's less important, but moved down just because it goes nicely with the last bullet here, where we elaborated a little bit about teaching. We switched this. We revised this language from attending to word relations because again, that didn't seem specific and active enough for what the teacher would need to do. We changed that to teaching word relations, and particularly via morphological variations of words. And we have an example there. And then several activities that have been shown to help teach that sort of word relations and morphological variations. So we just wanted those morphological bullets to be together. We did not necessarily intend to de-emphasize them in any way. So overall, this is quite a big change, but we're excited about it, and we think that it now it really shows that word learning is this much bigger, integrated, meaningful process in fourth and fifth grade, and reflects the research more accurately. This is something where this is one of those key things that we mentioned earlier, where we're not asking you to add on additional, an additional word list or additional instruction. We're actually hoping that this can be integrated and focus on multiple components at once. So I'm going to switch back. And with that, I'm going to switch back over to Miranda for Essential 8.
All right. Essential 8 focuses on providing students access and opportunities to read and learn with abundant and diverse reading material. And even though many of the elements of the practice remain, next slide, we made a few modifications to the stem of the practice as well as to bullets 8.1 through 8.5. We also added one new bullet here. For the stem, of the practice, next slide, we provided clarity that students might access reading material, yes, in the classroom, but also in school libraries. So there are multiple places students can access these materials. And opportunities to read. For 8.1, we just replaced including with such as to address feedback on word choice here, just to make sure that we weren't suggesting that the only resources you can use are information books, poetry, literature, and magazines, but that those are just examples of the kinds of resources that we would want students to have access to. For 8.2, there weren't any new research studies, confusions, or requests for clarification or elaboration that led us to make changes there. So that one remained the same. But next, we clarified that students might access reading material. Again, this is consistent with the STEM in the classroom, in schools, or in public libraries. And this is in 8.3. And then you can also see just some wording changes there that reflect feedback and just enhance clarity. For 8.4, we provided more clarity that reading materials shouldn't just expose students to rich language and vocabulary, but also should provide like a variety of concepts and themes students should be exposed to promote learning across content areas, not just in literacy. In addition to providing clarity around this language was added based on a request from the feedback and promotes better alignment with the 612 Essentials documents, just to illustrate that we're not just thinking about literacy instruction, we're also thinking about disciplinary instruction and how that's reflected in the resources that children have access to in the classroom as well. Finally, we modified the wording and structure of 8.5 based on a suggested format change, which provides clarity and better aligns with the wording in the K3 document. So here you can see that a lot of the core components remain, but the way that we've kind of mapped out the sub-bullets just makes it easier to read and understand, I think. Next slide. So you can see kind of what this looks like in a clean form here, but overall our changes in Essential 8 give more clarity for implementing the practices and really better align with other Essentials documents and enhance that continuity across grade levels. I think we're all set for Essential 9.
All right. Okay, so Essential 9 focuses on assessment and how assessment and observation inform instruction. So this is a really nice continuation of the work you were doing this morning. And if you look at the highlighted changes, you can see this is another essential where we did some editing of the actual words in the assessment. We added the word assessment because we believe that there's a balance. The research is clear there's a balance between formal and informal information that teachers need to make decisions and inform instruction. We thought that we wanted to be clear about the types of assessments and for both formal and informal that can inform those decisions. And so most of the other changes were about clarifying the use of both kinds of data. So if you go to the track changes version, 9.1 is the biggest change. There have basically been several studies and meta-analyses highlighting data-driven instruction and its impact on student outcomes, specifically mentioning particular kinds of formal assessments to identify areas of need, to offer or intensify interventions, or to monitor progress. So the previous version mentioned kind of various things that you could look at, but included mostly informal indicators. But we wanted to make clear that formative assessment can be formal and informal. And we wanted to include a few examples of what that might look like. 9.2 we did not want to include specific assessments, but just examples of what formal assessments might look like. But you got specific examples this morning, so I think that dovetails nicely. 9.2 highlights the use of assessment data to differentiate learning. It was clear that the mechanism by which formative assessment can improve student learning is through teachers' decisions to differentiate. And so we wanted to make that clear, and it also connects back to Essential 3 with the small group instruction recommendations there. 9.3 had no changes. 9.4, the language was clarified, and we took out self-assessment and peer feedback because we moved those into their own bullet, not because they're not important, but because it was starting to become too much in the one bullet. And then we separated, and then that last bullet is new, but it really is just taking content from the previous bullet and making it clear. So yeah, 9.4 now focuses on explicit feedback, and 9.5 on that self-assessment and peer feedback, which did show up in the research. So overall, we not as minor changes in Essential 9, but just reflect the new research on data-driven literacy instruction and differentiation and the types of assessments that can inform that work. And we'll go to 10.
Fantastic. I'm going to wrap us up here with Essential 10, which focuses on collaborating with families, caregivers, and the community to promote literacy. Next slide. Even though many of the core elements of this practice remain, which you might be questioning because you see so much highlighting, we did make a number of wording changes as well as added 2 additional bullets to provide clarity and reflect findings from recent research. Next slide, I'll talk you through the specific changes that we made. For the stem of the practice, we adopted much of the wording of the stem of Essential 10 from the K3 Essentials. We did this for a few reasons. We wanted to provide clarity, we wanted to provide additional detail, and we really wanted to enhance alignment between K3 and 4-5 documents here. So now we have this statement here underneath our focus on collaboration with families, caregivers, and the community in promoting literacy. We have this idea that families, caregivers, and the community engage in language and literacy interactions with children that can be drawn upon and extended in 4th and 5th grades. Educators should work together to incorporate family, caregivers, and community funds of knowledge, assets, and perspectives into the classroom, and that classroom teachers should serve as connectors between schools and communities by. So that really sets us up for the individual elements of the practice within Essential 10. And then for 10.1, we modified the wording to clarify what it looks like to support families to continue to provide reading and academic learning opportunities at home. And so 1.1 now reads that families may be provided with instructions such as guidelines, protocols, and routines on how to foster academic literacy learning at home. And this change is supported by recent research on family literacy and summer literacy programs in a handful of new studies. For 10.2, we changed students to children just to make it consistent with the language throughout this particular essential. And for 10.3, this is one that stayed the same. There weren't any new research studies, confusions, or requests for clarification or elaboration that led us to make any changes here. But for 10.4, here for this one, we really just changed the wording. The meaning remains the same, but we adopted the language of the K3 essential here just to provide clarity and enhance alignment across grade levels because we were saying really similar things. And so there wasn't any need for us to use different words to do that. And then for 10.5, we provided more clarity on examples of literacy supporting resources here. So first, we clarified that these resources are for families to use during literacy learning at home. We also clarified the broad variety of books that these resources might include, such as nonfiction, fiction, multilingual, and culturally relevant books and passages that align to students' interests and include texts that students can read independently. We also clarified that teachers can share information with families and caregivers about supporting children's use of educational TV or apps that children may access at home in ways that support literacy development. These changes really are all designed to provide greater clarity as well as alignment with recent research. And as I mentioned before, the changes are also better aligned with the language of the K3 and 612 essentials. And some of it, additionally, these changes include some word choice modifications based on requests that were made in our feedback. Next slide. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, we also added a couple of new bullets based on recent research to add clarity around Essential 10. So the first of the new bullets, 10.6, focuses on holding family literacy events to collaborate and share information with families and caregivers on how to support children's literacy learning at home. And this is supported by a few new studies that we identified that are post 2016. The second new of the new bullets, 10.7, we added focuses on actively communicating with families and caregivers using families' preferred modes of contact and language. Again, this bullet was added based on recent research as well as to just provide clarity around the different components of Essential 10. Next slide. Overall, these changes in Essential 10, we think, provide more clarity for implementing the practices, align with research that's new, and better align with other Essentials documents to, again, enhance continuity and clarity across all the grade levels. And so now that we have shared updates to each of the 10 Essentials, I'm going to turn it back over to Heather to lead us in another individual, but then a group reflection and opportunity to debrief.
All right, so with that, oh, and I love the updates in the corner or in the chat, so that's great. If you want to take a minute to reflect on these last three essentials, as Miranda said, we will be moving into a group reflection after this. So I'm going to give us just a minute and a half just to provide that space for reflection. We would have loved to, have breakouts all on the way, but we know how much time that can take once we get into them, and you'd feel like you just got started and we'd have to pull you back. And so, provided this personal reflection time for you, this will be our last one before the group, and then I'll pull you back for further instructions. Okay, I'm going to bring you back together, please. And one of the questions in the chat is, when will these be officially released? Today is the first day that we're doing a big share out. They will also be shared tomorrow at Early Literacy Task Force and at GLN on Thursday, even though they have been seen and approved by those groups. It'll be that official launch. They are also being updated on our website as well. So this week is the official launch, and they can be printed. We do need to work with the printer to make sure, as we have that one spot on our website where you can have books printed, we will make sure that they have the finalized copy for that. So if that helps. And then we're going to go, there's a quick question. Can you clarify the word affordances? Dr. Lallier asked about affordances as I'm pulling up the next slide. Miranda, I see you going for it, I think. Are you going to explain it for us?
Yeah, I can say a little bit about affordances, and Laura, jump in if you have any further clarity that you can provide. When we talk about affordances, often we're talking about both opportunities as well as what are, I'm not sure I have a great way to say it, but what are the kind of the opportunities that arise, or what are the ways in which they're supportive? Are there other ways that you would say that, Laura? How would you talk about affordances?
I would say that it's like opportunities for instruction, right? And
Yeah.
it's not like, and so it's high. What would, so I don't know if the word opportunities would be better, but basically the different, different materials have provide different opportunities. That is the kind of thing
Exactly.
that you're taking
That's a better way
advantage
of
of.
saying it. Thank you.
Mhm. Mhm.
And with that, we're going to go into our final group reflection. So choose an essential that is sticking with you, or put a couple at the top of your mind that you'd like to talk about. And you're going to select your own Zoom room. So the rooms will open up in a moment after I give the directions. And so if you chose Essential 2, you're going to do your region first. The rooms are named by your region and then the essential. So if I selected Essential 2 and I was in Region 2, I would go to Room 2, R2, which is Region 2, and Essential 2. I personally am in Region 5. I'm the Region 5 coordinator, or regional coach. So if I chose Essential 1, I would go to R5 for Region 5, E1, Essential 1. So you're going to select that room. If there's already 10 people in the room, choose a different room and go in and talk about that essential. If you are in the room and you get through your first essential, which I don't think you will, please feel free to jump onto another essential. On the agenda, you will see a document. So please, once you get in there, have one person access the recording document. If you don't know who, look to the person with the brightest color on, and they're the one that's going to open the document and take notes for us. And so you'll go right to your tab, and I can show you what that looks like in just a second. But you're going to reflect as a group on what shifts in practice do you foresee for this essential? What changes are you most excited about for this essential? And what supports clarification or additional information is needed for this essential? And again, this will help our team access. I'm going to stop because it's not letting me get out of here. I'm going to share again. There we go. Sorry, I could not escape my PowerPoint. If you go to this document right here, reflection by region, this is the document that once you are in your breakout rooms, one person, the one with the brightest color on, is going to be the recorder, and you're going to click on your region, and then you're going to add to the table what shifts, excitement, or supports you might need. We are going to go into our room for 8 minutes. And Shelly is going to open those rooms now. Again, if there's 10 people in the room, just choose another room within your region, please.
Oh,
All
and
right. Welcome back. If you could please take a moment to mute yourself as you enter back into the room. And if you could take a moment to answer this question, hopefully you were able to dig in a little bit more and have some conversation around what you saw today. What is your most important point from the 4 or 5 essentials learning? And as you are typing those answers in, I just want to say thank you to Dr. John Strong, Dr. Laura Tortorelli, and Dr. Miranda Fitzgerald and all the work that they have done around this. Again, this is the beginning of our conversations, the beginning of understanding the changes that have taken place and the new research that is out there. There will be more learning to come, and those conversations you just had in those rooms will be something that we will go back to and take a look at as we are planning and thinking about the learning to come. We appreciate you staying with us as we went through all of this. Laura or Miranda, is there anything that you would like to add to the room as they are putting these statements up? I'm seeing lots around the clarity and the intentionality, which is an amazing feeling because I know that that was really on the forefront of your minds.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to do this. I absolutely loved it. I loved working with Miranda and John and the whole team, and it was fantastic. It was fascinating and wonderful. So I really appreciate your trust in us and the opportunity to do this. Mhm.
Yeah, and I'll just echo everything Laura said so beautifully just a second ago. I really appreciate the opportunity to do it, and I couldn't ask for better people to work with.
And with that, we are going to go to lunch here in a moment. And so I'm going to give that 30-second pause of type in your answer because I'm going to be closing the window and I don't want anybody to be frustrated as we move to the next slide. So our time is, I'm going to do like the visual closing as our time is closing up. And I will move to the next slide. If there's something that didn't get in, go ahead and put it into, I can try to open it back up during lunch. So I will do that for the second half of lunch before we come back.